There is something dangerously seductive about the phrase, kill the ego. It makes you feel advanced, disciplined, spiritually ambitious. But pause. If the ego is the enemy, who is declaring the war? When you say, I need to dissolve my ego, who is that I? The ego trying to eliminate the ego. That should disturb you. Because the more ruthless you try to be with your ego, the more subtle forms of spiritual pride begin to grow in the background. Maybe the problem was never the ego itself. Maybe the problem is that you never defined what you were fighting. Is the ego your personality, your ambition, your insecurity, your trauma, your intelligence, your drive? Or is it simply the story you keep defending? Look carefully at your daily life. When someone challenges your opinion and you feel resistance, that tightening need to respond, to correct, to protect, what is that? When you compare your progress to someone else's, what is that? When you imagine a future version of yourself finally being validated, what is that? We call it ego, but is it a thing? Or is it movement? Memory protecting continuity, identity resisting collapse, a narrative fighting for survival. Now it becomes uncomfortable. What if the ego is not your enemy, but your addiction to preserving a self-image is? Ramana Maharshi reduced it to astonishing precision. He said the ego is nothing but the I thought. When the I is sought, it disappears. Not suppressed, not purified, not improved, simply investigated. Because when you search directly for the one who claims ownership, the I that says my thoughts, my feelings, my life, you find sensations, memories, thoughts. But you never find a solid center. The ego is not a solid enemy. It is identification happening now. Krishnamurti went even further. He said the self is a bundle of memories. The observer is the observed. The me you defend is continuity, the past projecting itself into the present and calling it identity. And when you try to improve yourself spiritually, to become a better, more awakened version of yourself, it is memory trying to rearrange memory. The ego refining itself. You are not dissolving it, you are polishing it. Alan Watts saw the absurdity in the whole drama. The ego, he said, is simply the focus of conscious attention. The real mistake is treating a functional identity as a metaphysical center. You need an identity to function. You need a name to answer. But mistaking that functional identity for your deepest reality is like mistaking a wave for the ocean. Watts once said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The ego cannot grasp itself because it is never an object. It is activity. Robert Adams simplified it even further. The ego is an idea you have about yourself. An idea repeated long enough begins to feel solid. Believe it deeply enough, and it feels personal. But ideas do not require destruction. They require clarity. Anandamayi Ma spoke with gentleness, but the same radical truth. Where there is the sense of I, there is bondage. Bondage is not having a personality. Bondage is mistaking the personality for your core. Notice something important. None of these teachers treat the ego as a monster to be stabbed. They treat it as a misunderstanding to be seen through. So what actually dies when people talk about ego death? Everything you call me belongs to the story. Your name, your history, your reputation, your wounds, your achievements. All of it began in time. All of it evolves. All of it will end. The ego belongs to biography, and biography is impermanent. The personality you had 10 years ago is not the same one you have today. If it changes, it cannot be absolute. If it is constructed, it cannot be ultimate. Ego is not an object. It is a story being told now. Awareness is what hears the story, and while the story shifts, something else has remained constant. There was awareness in childhood. There was awareness in adolescence. There is awareness now. The narrative evolved, but the fact of being aware did not evolve in the same way. And when that becomes clear, not as belief but as direct recognition, something begins to destabilize. The need to defend weakens. The need to compare softens. The need to constantly assert me begins to lose urgency, not because you killed the ego, but because you stopped mistaking movement for identity. Compassion becomes less calculated, love becomes less strategic, altruism no longer feels like sacrifice. Because when the narrative is no longer sovereign, self-protection stops dominating every interaction. The modern mistake is turning this into a project. Killing the ego becomes a new achievement, a new hierarchy, a new spiritual identity. The ego wanting to be the one who has transcended ego. But the one who wants to kill the ego is also just another thought appearing and disappearing. Perhaps maturity lies elsewhere. Not in destroying the mechanism, not in worshiping it, but in understanding its nature. The ego is functional, but it is historical. It belongs to time. What you are at the deepest level is not confined to time in the same way And when that is seen, the war ends. Not because someone won, but because there were never two sides to begin with. And then one quiet question remains. What if the I that wants to be free is precisely what must be seen as impermanent?